Hi, and welcome back to my videos. Thanks so much for being here. And if it's your first time, I hope you'll check out some of the playlists and some of the other topics. Today I'm going to talk about the role of epilepsy in the history of Christianity. Now, this might seem like a strange topic, but it's certainly an interesting one. Several people who have significantly influenced the churches are suspected of having had some form of epilepsy. In a few minutes, I'll tell you about a woman from the 19th century who started a denomination that is still thriving and growing today and may base much of what it believes on epileptic hallucinations. But first, let me explain where this idea originates. People suffering from epileptic seizures often experience hearing voices or seeing visions that they interpret as having religious experiences. And they're certainly ecstatic experiences, and sometimes they even completely change the direction of the person's life. These visions are often tied to conversion experiences, after which the visionary becomes fanatically religious. Other personality changes can also occur. More about that in just a minute. Let's go right to the Christian scriptures for the first example. Saul of Tarsus describes what happened to him as he traveled along a road to Damascus. He was a conservative Jew who was on a mission to strike terror into the followers of the newly formed Jesus cult and to wipe out that movement. He considered their teachings blasphemy. It was the work of the devil. During his trip, however, he suddenly fell to the ground, found himself surrounded by a bright light, and heard the voice of Jesus speaking to him. When he regained consciousness, he was unable to see and had to be helped by his companions to the nearby city, where he recovered his sight 3 days later. Not only was his physical blindness removed, but also, he believed, his spiritual blindness, where before his goal had been to destroy faith in Jesus. Now it was to spread this faith. He became known as Paul and is considered Saint Paul by Christians. Paul was the author of much of the New Testament and is relied upon for many of the basic teachings of this faith. Now we know that Paul did not receive his wisdom from the other apostles who had been with Jesus for his entire ministry. He states that he was taught by the Lord himself during a period of isolation. And he also describes how he continued to have visions, how he had been taken up into the third heaven and had seen things that were unspeakable. Well, did Paul receive the wisdom he included in his writings during these vision experiences? Were these visions that he describes additional seizures like the one previously recorded? It's pretty common knowledge that Paul's experience describes a classic epileptic episode. In fact, in Ireland, epilepsy has been known as St. Paul's disease. Now, some scientists speculate that if there's a God attempting to communicate with us, that being may do so through the receptive consciousness that we're seeing here as a disease. Or it may be easier for us to get in touch with a higher plane of consciousness during an epileptic seizure, an epileptic event, I want to call it. Did you ever notice how completely Paul's life changed after his experience? But he isn't the only one with possible epilepsy. Obviously, it isn't feasible to diagnose a person from the past. We can only speculate about this from written descriptions that are left and compare them, those descriptions, with what is known about the disease today. I quote from my book about this topic: seizures accompanied by the personality changes possible in temporal lobe epilepsy, called Geschwind syndrome, with its result of extreme changes in behavior, thought, and understanding, may actually have been the basis for the disposition and character of many religious figures. These are figures who are revered by the religious community. Such people tend toward obsessionism, a profound sense of personal destiny, hypergraphia, plus religiosity and philosophical interest. Now, hypergraphia is the symptom of producing vast amounts of written material, much more than normal, more than our most prolific authors of today. To note, Paul wrote much of the New Testament, and I'll tell you about in just a moment two others who produced immense literary libraries. Well, the next person I want to mention is Joan of Arc, who was born in the French village of Domremy in about 1412 of devout Roman Catholic parents. At the age of 12, she began having visions. She not only received auditory command hallucinations, voices telling her to lead the army into war or to go to church or things like that, but she also saw and spoke with figures that she claimed were Saint Michael, Saint Catherine, and Saint Margaret. It's well documented that people having auditory and visual hallucinations may be suffering from partial complex seizure activity. Now, Joan insisted that she'd been chosen by God for a special mission, and she gave a religious interpretation to the visions that she had. She was obsessed with purity in life. As a teen, she appeared to be hyper-religious, refusing marriage and devoting herself to celibacy. What gives more credence to the possibility of seizure activity is that once these events began, the activity increased until she was hearing voices almost daily. Saint Teresa of Avila, some people pronounce that Avila, lived from 1515 to 1582. Now, we know very little about her physical condition, except that as a child, she saw apparitions. At 24, she fell into a faint and was in a coma for 4 days. After she recovered, it was discovered she had bitten her tongue, and she had terrible headaches. And she was hearing sounds like rushing water and singing birds, but she knew that the sounds were inside of her head. Now, this happened to her several times, only once resulting in a coma. In her writings, she describes what might be a classic experience of aura, that is, the few moments before a seizure, and the resultant feelings from this experience. So she writes, drawing on her personal experiences. She calls the fourth ascent of the human soul, quote, a devotion of ecstasy and rapture. Sense activity ceases. Body and spirit are in the throes of a sweet, happy pain, alternating between a fearful, fiery glow. A complete impotence and unconsciousness. A spell of strangulation, and sometimes by such an ecstatic flight, the body is literally lifted into space. This is followed by a reactionary relaxation in a swoon-like weakness. It is the climax of a mystical experience producing a trance. One of the most famous and influential Christian writers suspected of having temporal lobe epilepsy was Immanuel Svedenborg. To quote an abstract from an article by E. Foote Smith and T.J. Smith in the February 1996 edition of the magazine Epilepsy. It says, how is it that the name of a brilliant 18th century scientist and philosopher, many of whose exceptional achievements were often advanced for his time, is almost never mentioned in the annals of science? And how did it happen that a man very deeply dedicated to the achievements of science experienced a vision that completely altered the course of his life? We suggest, based on an examination of his extensive self-analytical writings, that the source of his spiritual experiences was temporal lobe epilepsy, sometimes just noted as TLE, and that he was among a group of creative religious thinkers also suspected or known to have had epilepsy, who have changed Western civilization. Let me mention that even before he made the transition from scientist to theologian, Svedenborg exhibited the symptom hypergraphia. This has been used to diagnose temporal lobe epilepsy, even when no seizures have occurred. And here's an example of what this means. Between 1747 and his death, he published 18 books. 25 more books were printed following his demise, plus 15 miscellaneous works. Now, to fully comprehend the extent of his writing, I have to mention that his book, Heavenly Secrets, is 12 volumes. Apocalypse Explained is 6 volumes. Spiritual Diary is 5 volumes long. Apocalypse Revealed is 2 volumes, and True Christian Religion is also 2 volumes. And if that isn't amazing enough, he wrote scientific books prior to his change of field. Wilkinson, a man who wrote a biography of him, counted or attempted to count those writings and said that they are approximately 31 books. Svedenborg rejected the teachings of the traditional Christian churches and began his own church called New Church, which still has followers to this day. They rely on his writings from his visions for factual information about the spiritual life. Finally, I come to the controversial prophetess and founder of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, Ellen White. In addition to having trance and vision experiences and exhibiting the symptoms of Geschwind syndrome, including hypergraphia, we know that as a child, Ellen White suffered a severe head injury that left her in a coma for 6 days and had so many side effects that she had to actually leave her education in about the 4th or 6th grade. Statistics support that 46% of people with such a head injury in the area of the temporal lobe develop seizure activity. I have another video about the founding of this denomination that details a bit more about her life, and I will give a more extensive teaching in the future of her health conditions. For now, let me say that many doctors reviewing the information we have about her believe that she too suffered from temporal lobe epilepsy. Again, in her case, her church uses the Bible plus her writings, and many of which reflect what she had seen in vision. And they use this as the basis of their church teachings. It seems clear that since we can never know if any of these people received their visions through seizure activity or through some other process, that this can only be a topic of interest, speculation for us. The visions themselves have to be evaluated by their content, not by the process through which they were received. Do they bring enlightenment and worth to life? Do they have a positive influence? Are they uplifting, joyful, and wise? And if these people were able to bring us good messages while battling disease, they deserve our thanks as well as our admiration. If you'd like to learn more about how scientists describe the hallucinations of epilepsy and how they relate to personal religious experience, and especially Ellen White or some of the others I've mentioned, just leave me a note in the comment section. Well, I hope you found this topic intriguing, as I certainly did. I invite you to subscribe to my channel and request notifications when I upload, and be sure to leave your comments and your suggestions for future videos. In the meantime, I hope you have a great week. Stay safe and stay healthy, and I hope you can join with me again next time. Bye for now.